Maybe it's because you and I are surrounded by the 24-hour news cycle. Maybe it's because of the omnipresence of social media. Maybe it's because of global climate change. Maybe it's because life today is so fast and so demanding. But doesn't it feel like to you that you and I are living in such apocalyptic days? Every time you turn around, there's some new disaster, some new crisis, something that tells you and me what we are about is urgent right now. Well, a sense of urgency, frankly, is what characterizes most biblical apocalyptic literature. And that kind of literature, by the way, shows up in books like Revelation and Daniel, and even in the Gospels, a gospel like Luke. This kind of literature is aware that life now is problematic, full of challenge, that which makes it not all that pleasant sometimes. For apocalyptic writers, it feels as if the world as we know it or as they knew it is falling apart. Well, for the writer of the Gospel of Luke, the world has fallen apart. The evidence is strong that the Gospel of Luke was written around 80 to 90 ACE, a time after the Roman-Jewish War, during which the Jewish temple was destroyed. And what we have in today's reading is not a prediction of what's going to happen. And by the way, this is true for most apocalyptic literature. I wish we got this. We have lots of folks preoccupied with the book of Revelation and Daniel as if it's predicting what's going on right now. That was not the point of those books. And nor is it the point of what we're receiving from Luke today. What we're getting from Luke today is an interpretation of what has already happened. What has already happened is war and violence and destruction of holy places like temples, Christians being handed over to political or religious authorities. They're being betrayed by parents and brothers and other relatives and friends. This, for them, is the data of history. And Luke is trying to help them figure that data out, especially in light of the delay of the return of Jesus. You see, Lucan's community thought that Jesus was coming back any time and it was going to make everything right. And, well, he didn't show up. You can see the emphasis on the delay of the return of Jesus in Luke's storytelling today. It's classic. Beware that you're not led astray, for many will come in my name and say, I am he, and the time is near. Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for these things must happen first, but the end will not follow immediately. There will be earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues. But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. In other words, there's a whole lot of stuff that has to happen before the end arrives. It's as if Luke is saying, and I think he is saying, we're in it for the long haul. And I think that's the truth for us. There's no quick fix coming. No supposed Messiah is going to drop on the scene and make inflation go away or make evil leaders like Putin forever disappear from the scene, turn every one of us into caring and compassionate human beings, wave a wand and eliminate the climate crisis. No, we're in it for the long haul. And beware, Luke is saying, lest you be led astray. Do not go after those who offer all kinds of false promises, who want you to join their club, tell their stories, or fixate on their issues. Lutheran pastor John Petty was really helpful for me this past week in discerning Jesus' message today. Especially in Jesus' words, many will come in my name and say, I am he, and the time is near, do not go after them. Petty pointed out that for many of the false messiahs, the arrival of the end meant participation in a war. And so when Jesus says, do not go after them, he is urging them not to join their civil wars. To me, that's so intriguing and so telling. Many come in the name of Jesus and invite you to join their battles. They tell you that the world is falling apart, and the only way to address the crisis is to believe like them, act like them, vote like them. Now, I have to admit, sometimes to me, it feels like the world is falling apart. One crisis after another, one oddity after another, one war after another, one storm after another. And if that is not enough, many of us are experiencing an earthquake in the way that the world is ordered. The social arrangements that many knew are no longer the social arrangements that seem to be true today. There are radical changes in things like gender and sexual identity and marriage and religion and politics and communication technologies. The world, as many have known it, seems to be ending. And when that occurs, folks go looking for all kinds of ways to cope. And they go after all kinds of false messiahs with all their promises. And I think that this, plus the reality of social media, explains much of the oddity that is occurring in our culture today. The strange conspiracy theories that are popping up everywhere, like QAnon. People are deeply aware that the world that they knew it is no longer the world that they're living in now, and so they join all kinds of movements, odd movements, cling to all kinds of promises, most of which are false. What's Luke's advice today? Do not go after them. Do not enter their civil wars. The one we follow is a Messiah of peace. We are in this loving, peaceful reign of God for the long haul. There aren't any easy shortcuts. And for many of us, many people, one of the shortcuts is often control. What do you do? Maybe I should say, what do I do when life seems out of control? Well, I try to control it, of course. I see this happening in family life all the time. Life seems to be falling apart in the family. What do you try to do about it? You try to control it. Control is a default setting for many of us. But listen to what Jesus in Luke tells those who are facing the world falling apart, those who are in it for the long haul. So make up your minds. Make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance. For I will give you words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. There is serious training going on right now among some Christians to give them the words and the concepts that they need to help them fight the battles that they're supposed to be involved in, help them control a world that seems to be so out of control. But Jesus says there's an alternative to control. There's an alternative control. You don't have to figure it all out in advance. Ellen, from our Bible study this past week, made this marvelous point that I hadn't thought about. She says, when you try to do that, you imagine all kinds of things that you need to do because you're going to control that future. A lot of times what you end up doing is creating a future that never, ever occurs. Your mind goes to all kinds of places. This is what's going to go wrong, and that will go wrong, and pretty soon all of your attempts to control leave you out of control. And Jesus says you don't have to live by control. You don't have to become defense attorneys who work hours and days to establish your case. You can enter into the wildness of the moment and be given what you need, because it is not about defending yourself or defending the faith or defending Jesus. He can manage it all on his own. It isn't about control. It's about letting go. It's about letting go something that is so hard, especially when it feels that the world is falling apart. But Jesus says we're going to be really surprised when we let go. We'll have what we need. We'll be able to say what we need. Life may actually be a whole lot more pleasant. Christianity as defense, and I'd say marriage as defense, or other relationships as defense, and politics as defense, that is not the way of Jesus. make up your mind not to prepare your defense in advance. I guess I could put it this way. Our worth as human beings is not dependent upon our defense, which is what a lot of us believe, which is why we always have to win the arguments in our marriages and relationships, because our worth is dependent upon our being right. But our worth as human beings, the faith says, is not dependent upon our defense. It isn't based on our victory in the who can defend themselves better battles. Jesus in Luke today says, "You'll be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair on your head will perish." Well, I suspect that many early Christians heard these words and wondered about them, because some of them, or at least their relatives, not only lost their hair, they lost their lives. But what I think Jesus is saying is that you and I live in light of something bigger than all of the hatred, all of the attack, all of the defense, all of the violence. We live in light of a love that claims us and names us, a love that treasures us, even personally and individually. Each of us matters to God. What people say about us, what people do to us, what life does to us, what our health does to us, even what we do to ourselves, none of that changes who we are. We are loved. We are valued, even if it appears that the world we know, as we have known it, is falling apart. My advice is simple. Cling to that truth. Cling to that truth. It's this truth that produces within us a resilience, that which leads us to what Jesus calls endurance, that enables us to be in it for the long haul. Now, the author of 2 Thessalonians in our second reading for today is really struggling with what it looks like to engage the long haul, and he says what is a well-known passage: anyone who is not willing to work should not eat. And I have to tell you, this really isn't a condemnation of people who are moochers off of the public welfare or something. That's not the point of that, as it's often understood. It really is an indictment, frankly, of religious leaders and zealots who are coming into town and mooching off people, and likely also an indictment against those who, because they thought the end was coming, stopped working. The state of the world, the sense that it's falling apart, the feeling that the end is near is not an invitation to quit working, to quit doing the good things that we know need to be done. Luther was once asked what would he do if he knew the world was coming to an end tomorrow, and you know what he said? I'd plant a tree. I often wonder, if I knew I was going to die tomorrow, would I still do the dishes? Maybe not, but we're celebrating the birth of somebody who's 90 years old today, and I got to tell you, Dan signed up to be one of our Stephen ministers. He signed up to be involved in a ministry that helps people cope with the world falling apart at age 90. This is not a time to curl up and throw in the towel. This is a time to get to work, to live love, to care for the earth, to tend to the poor and forgotten, and to hold the hands of the sick, the dying, and the imprisoned. And by the way, this is a matter of urgency. These days are not days to get weary in doing what is right. Amen.